Hi, welcome to the Helen Bader Foundation CBRF Caregiver Training Program. This unit will be on chain of command. As a CBRF caregiver, it is important for you to know what you're accountable for, what you need to report, who you need to report it to, and when you need to report it. My name is Marge Gustowiak, and I am the Vice President of Health Services at 3 Pillars. This is a retirement community that cares for people from independent living to a skilled nursing facility. Presenting with me today is Mary Hoof. She's the manager of Riverside Lodge, which is our CBRF on 3 Pillars. Mary has been in the health field for 16 years. She started out as a nursing assistant and received her Bachelor's of Science degree in 1989 in Health Service Administration and Gerontology. Now's the moment you've all been waiting for, and that's test time. Again, like all the other units, you will be taking 2 tests, a pre-test and a post-test. The pre-test will give you an opportunity to see what information you need to gain from the unit. Then you take the post-test, which is the same test. You may now turn off your video to take the pre-test on chain of command. Well, we welcome everybody back from the pre-test. And Mary, I'd like to thank you for being with me here today and participating in this video series.
You're very welcome, Marge.
As the manager of a CBRF, I know you have working knowledge of what needs to be done. And as a manager, it's important for you to get information when you want it and not to get information when you don't want it. To start us out, why don't you just explain to me in your own words what chain of command means?
The chain of command is the way I get information from my caregivers, who are the direct link to my residents. They give me information in an immediate sort when there is an emergency situation. They give me information by passing along to other shifts, and they give information to other persons.
If we would use an example of someone falling and scraping their knees, how soon would you want that information, and who else would you expect them to share that with?
I expect that my caregivers, after their first aid training, would be able to cleanse the knee and report to the next shift that it might need to be monitored to make sure that it does not get infected. If they are not comfortable taking those steps and have not received that training, they certainly should notify myself or the nurse on duty to make sure that that can be taken care of.
Having worked with you, I know we both have the same philosophy here of not having anyone do anything they've either not been trained in or they're not comfortable doing. So it's important they know they can contact either yourself or myself or perhaps a nurse or the doctor and get the proper training or direction they need in order to perform a task. Let's take a little more serious example, and let's say someone falls and has an obvious break. What other people would be involved in that chain of command?
Well, the first person involved in an immediate situation would be to dial the 911 emergency services. They certainly would be the ones to come and take care of that resident to the emergency room. They would also need then to notify the doctor that that resident had had an injury and is going to be taken to the emergency room so that they can follow up. You also need to let your manager know that this event has happened, and she may need to contact the family and let them know.
Do you think the caregiver would ever be contacting family?
Yes, they can.
I think what's important is that CBRFs are all different, and depending on the structure of the chain of command, perhaps they would be making a direct contact with the family, or perhaps as a manager that would be a report that you would want to take care of yourself. Could you review one more time what the key elements are in the chain of command?
The key elements are that the caregiver knows what they need to report, to whom they should report the information, and when they should.
I think a reoccurring theme everybody's going to be hearing through this tape is that the caregiver and the resident are really the very center of the chain. They're the person that spends the most time with the resident. But what's important for them to know is that there's many other people that they will be reporting to, and many other people that may be accountable for certain cares in specific situations. Let's use an example, another immediate need example of calling 911. Let's say a patient has taken too much of their medication and they feel very nauseated and have fainted.
Well, certainly it is a 911 call. That resident is in immediate danger. We need to get word to the pharmacist. We need to get word to the nurse. We need to get word to the doctor. And those people should all be notified in that situation. The family, too, needs to be notified. And most times, if you're the only caregiver on duty, those job responsibilities are yours.
I think what's helpful for people to know is even though they might be alone, that they know there's someone else they can contact. I think one of the professions, even as nurses, that we can forget to contact is a pharmacy. They're taking a look at medications and may need to know what that medication should or shouldn't do, that it's okay to call the pharmacist and talk to them.
They always give us good information regarding medications.
Next, what we'll be doing is taking a look at a chart that's going to walk us through some very common occurrences that happen in CBRFs. And this chart is going to explain and give some samples of the event. Then it's going to say what needs to be reported, when it needs to be reported, and to whom it needs to be reported to. So if the people viewing the video would turn to that chart, I'd like you and I to walk through these charts with them.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's critical that people know every CBRF is going to be a little bit different. And so the information we're sharing is basically what we do at Riverside Lodge, but this could be different. A suggestion that was made to me, which I'm actually excited about, is to take this chart to your manager and find out how that manager views these events. So that would be a recommendation I would make.
And that's the first place to ask. You want to know from your manager or from the owner, whoever there is in your chain of command, just what events they would like reported.
Okay, well, if we start to look at the charts that's titled Common Events Occurring in the CBRF, we'll hit the first section. The first section is Change in Mental Status. This can be as simple as someone usually having a very pleasant personality becoming very nasty to people. It can be someone that's normally understands the routine suddenly becoming confused and maybe they're getting up to go to the bathroom and they forget what they're doing or where they are. Or it could be, for an example, a change in a sleep pattern.
If someone has had a very restless night and been unable to sleep, that should be reported to the next shift. If they have not been able to sleep and rest, they may not be able to participate in activities and may find it difficult to concentrate during the day. If it is a single occurrence, that's all we need to know. If it continues to happen, there may be some underlying problems that we need to deal with.
I think what's important here is this a routine? Does this happen the next night and the next night? I think if people use common sense, if they may have a restless night and not sleep, and what does that mean? I know as a manager you're not wanting them to call you at 3 in the morning and say, Emily's not sleeping tonight, what should I do? So there is a lot of judgment and an element of common sense that needs to be used here. And I also liked what you said about passing it on to the next shift, because if they can't concentrate or they are a little grumpy, it's most likely due to the fact that they didn't get a good night's sleep.
Mm-hmm.
I know you've also worked in a CBRF that took care of mentally ill people, and these are younger and stronger people. Let's take a more serious example, and that's when someone becomes very aggressive, and there's a fear that they could seriously hurt either someone else or themselves. How would you expect this to be handled?
Most of the times, the caregivers are given a course in how to apply a physical restraint. If they have not been so trained, then certainly dialing emergency services to help contain that person from injury or harm to others is certainly warranted.
Again, I think this depends on the CBRF setting that you're working in. Like you said, in that situation, you would have been trained in that. Perhaps if they're working with the elderly in an Alzheimer's setting, that is not something we spend a lot of time training people with, and so 911 would be the first step versus the physical restraining and perhaps medicating in a more specialized CBRF.
And that does depend on your training. If you're not comfortable in that situation, please resort to other information.
I always believe that it's better to err on the side of safety.
Definitely.
The next area we're looking at is a change in physical status. And that can be from constipation to breaking a bone to someone throwing up all night or all day to bleeding. Several examples in the change in physical status can occur. Let's take the example of someone developing a fever.
Well, certainly a fever on its own is not a very loud cry for help, but it certainly does need to be monitored. There could be other complications along with that fever that we are unaware of at the beginning, and certainly needs to be reported. Certainly if you're unsure if that person should have Tylenol or a medication, you should report to your nurse and have the temperature taken so that you have a range to give her on the phone. She will then instruct if you are not comfortable just giving Tylenol for that fever. And if there are other symptoms along with that fever, those also would need to be reported.
I know not all CBRFs have a nurse, and I think that's where we at Three Pillars have an advantage because you do have an access to a nurse. If there were not a nurse, what are some of the things you might expect your caregiver to do in the case of a fever?
Well, first to generally check that fever and make sure they know what the temperature is. If they're just slightly warm, they may be just having a little dehydration and may need some extra fluids. It certainly all comes back to using common sense when dealing with problems that arise.
And that's exactly what I was thinking, is taking a look at using the common sense. You know, people, even when they physically exert themselves, can have a fever. And so we need to be sure that we use common sense and pay attention to what's going on. People can exert themselves and their temperature will go up a little bit, and if they're not thinking to take fluids or drink a little extra water, that can complicate it. So common sense, I think, is key. I know managers don't want to be called every time there's a slight problem that's occurring, but yet don't want to discourage the communication so they get the information that they need.
Right.
Another common occurrence that we have in our setting, because we are dealing with the elderly and their hearts aren't always as healthy, is chest pain. So tell me, one of the residents is having chest pain. What do you expect of the caregiver?
I expect the caregiver to know that resident really well and be aware if they do have a medication that the resident can take for that chest pain, if they are having an angina attack. They also need to know if they are not comfortable giving that medication to notify someone, the manager or the nurse on duty, and if they can get no response from them, to have the resident taken to the emergency room with 911, because that is not inappropriate in chest pain cases.
I bring that example up because it's one I have controversy with other nurses who want to make sure we don't abuse the emergency room. And so there's a hesitancy to go ahead and call 911. But in my opinion, anyone with heart problems or elderly that has a chest pain that is unusual, the only way you're going to find out if it's serious is to have them checked out in the emergency room. The next area we look at is medication orders and treatments. Some things that people may come across is that the doctor is calling and wants to change the medications. Maybe the resident is asking for something that they don't have the medication for, or the medication is missing or in the wrong box. Mary, pick an example of a medication situation and tell me how you'd walk your CBRF caregiver through that.
I have had instances where medications have been missing. They definitely need to count out and make sure that the right medications are being given. If that instance has occurred, they need to notify either the manager or the nurse, or sometimes the pharmacist can even walk them through what medications there are and what they look like and make sure that those are the correct medications to be given.
This is an area I don't like people to fool around with, because especially in the elderly population, they can be so sensitive to their medications. I think as people are comfortable supervising and becoming familiar with medications, they can make better judgment calls. The two extreme examples I'm thinking of is someone has some pain and should they take 1 or 2 Tylenol, that there might be opportunity for them to make that judgment call versus a heart medication and should they take 1 or 2 because they don't think their heart is working as good. And residents can be pretty adamant about what they believe. I had an example of a resident that had heart medication and he hadn't taken any. And I asked him if he realized that, and he says, well, of course I didn't need any. And this was a medication that was supposed to be taken every day. So you need to know your patients, you need to be familiar with your medications and know when to report those types of discrepancies.
We also need to be aware, Marge, when a resident has overtaken a medication. If we have checked their medications the day before and the next day we come and that medication is completely gone, that needs to get a signal that we need to check and see where that medication went to.
Yes, more medication doesn't mean better, does it?
No.
Okay. The fourth area we're looking at is a refusal of cares, meds, and nutrition. Working with the elderly, we do have residents with dementia and with Alzheimer's at Riverside Lodge. So I know it's not uncommon that they may refuse to get dressed, or they may refuse to eat a meal, or they may refuse to participate in an activity. Walk through the chain of command in a refusal of someone for a meal, for example.
One refusal of a meal is not anything to get very excited about. Even though there are things we can try, like removing the resident from the area and returning them to that area may give them a different outlook and may get them to eat their meal. But at times that isn't even going to work. And we can just let that resident not eat one meal. If in the future they have continually refused and there is a pattern and their nutrition is not good, then we need to get our nurse or dietary persons involved and get supplements to make sure that that person can maintain their dietary intake.
I think, again, if we look at it like our own lives, I know there's meals I've skipped and it wasn't important to me, or there were other pressing issues I felt I needed to attend to, and I know that didn't threaten my health in any way. So again, an element of judgment and common sense. And the other thing I know we're going to be reinforcing throughout this unit is that every CBRF is different. You know, one manager may want to know that information immediately, whereas other ones will have a log to report that information that they check daily.
Yes, we do.
Section 5 goes into family concerns and communications, and as a CBRF caregiver, people do come in frequent contact with families. Sometimes it's very pleasurable contacts, and that's receiving the compliments and thanking the people for doing a good job and complimenting for their care and concern. Sometimes the family's going to be out of town, and so they want us to know how to reach them, and so that's information that needs to be shared. On the unpleasant side is an angry family member, and they may be upset about something about the cares. Can you walk us through the chain of command using an example of an angry family member?
I find that family members become angry and upset when things have not been explained to them, why the cares are being done the way they are, or why we are encouraging some people to be very independent when they don't feel that is appropriate. Our caregivers should always get information from the families and help them to understand why things are being done the way they are. If that is not a satisfactory explanation, they certainly can tell the families that I can be contacted during my normal business hours and would be happy to go over with them why we are taking care of their person the way they are.
What information is it important for you to get from that caregiver in that situation?
I need to know that the family is upset, and they certainly should leave me a note on that. If they think the family is very, very upset, just a phone call to let me know that they have become upset and that maybe I would like to contact them first thing tomorrow to find out if there's something I can help them settle.
I think in those cases, one of the most important things that the angry family needs to know is that someone cares and is listening and attempting to do something about it.
And that certainly is the caregiver's role. They need to be concerned that the family does understand why that person is doing the things they are and why we have them being more independent, or at least attempting to maintain their independence.
Section 6 is on missing, lost, or stolen belongings. Working with the elderly and many people with dementia, again, I think you might agree with me that this is not uncommon, that someone believes something's been stolen, someone's taken something from them. It can happen that another resident may have been in their room to give them that impression. How do you expect the CBRF caregiver to deal with that?
It's something the caregiver needs to do immediately, and that is with the resident, is to go to their room and help them look for the belonging that's lost. If it still cannot be found, then we need to know that there is something missing, and maybe that we need to look in someone else's room for it. And certainly it's not something that is something you wake someone up in the middle of the night for, but the manager does need to know that.
I think that's a fairly common occurrence, and that can keep someone awake at night too, thinking, oh my goodness, I had $5 and I know it was stolen and I can't sleep until I find it. And so that's where it can be fun for a caregiver to play detective, because very often it has been misplaced. And as you get to know the residents, or maybe Emily down the hall has collected those things, so you get to play detective and can often find the article that has been perceived as being stolen. The last section we'll be going through is abuse and neglect issues. An example of this may be a resident has accused a CBRF caregiver of being unkind to them. They may accuse them of having hurt them either physically or have yelled at them and hurt them emotionally. A family member may be accusing a staff member in this area, or perhaps another resident will say, you know, I saw that staff member go over and kick my friend over there. Can you give an example of something that you've experienced?
Well, certainly any perception that there has been any kind of abuse needs to be immediate notification of the manager or of the owner. And certainly it's a very serious subject. Residents sometimes get bruises and scrapes by themselves. I mean, they're not a very stable population, they're very frail, their skin integrity is very tender, and all they would need to do is bump a wall and they have bruises up and down their arm. But abuse does happen, and it is something we need to deal with immediately. The manager should come and do the initial investigation upon hearing any kind of abuse allegations.
I know you deal with many residents that have dementia. Why is that immediacy so important in those cases?
A dementia patient can certainly give you a good idea of what has happened immediately following that incident. In 2 or 3 days, or even sometimes 3 or 4 hours, you are not going to get the same report of information from them, and that would need to be immediate.
I know it's so important to remember to speak to a dementia resident in very simple terms. And some of the questions I know I've asked them to get that information is, were people kind to you, or did anybody hurt you today? And like you said, you can get some immediate feedback. If you would wait till the next day, they might not have a clue of what you're talking about, or you could even upset them with your questioning.
They would have no idea what you were talking about. That is already into another era for them.
Yeah, their sense of timing is so different than what ours is. Those are issues that I know both of us take very serious, and in our case, there would be no exception to not report that immediately. We would expect there to be a phone call as soon as any type of suspicion was noted.
Right.
I'm now going to be going over some general guidelines for emergency situations, and this would be, in my opinion, where I would expect people to call 911. The thing we'll be emphasizing over and over is that this can vary by facility, and certainly this is a list you would go over with your manager and get that person's input on. Some things that would be an immediate need to call 911 would be a loss of consciousness, an obvious break of a bone, an unresponsiveness in a resident, shortness of breath that is not relieved by rest. Getting away from some physical symptoms would be that there's an intruder in the facility that will not leave after you've informed them to do that, or that a resident has wandered off and is lost. Can you think of any other examples where you would be calling 911?
Well, you certainly want to call 911 when there is a situation that you do not feel capable of handling and cannot get any further information from your chain of command. That certainly is a situation you do need to call in some expert in emergency services.
Okay. I will have you now, Mary, go over some general information where people wouldn't necessarily be calling 911, but it would be information you would expect to be recorded and reported to other people in the chain of command.
Certainly, and there are so many day-to-day things that happen. Loss of electricity, a water leak, a lack of water. If you have no water in your plumbing situation, that certainly is a condition that you need to deal with almost immediately, but it not necessarily a 911 call. Heating in the wintertime, air conditioning in the summer, those are all things that need to be reported and incidents that can happen at any facility. Sometimes families are involved very definitely in the caregiver role too, and do make doctor's appointments, and that's information that needs to be passed along. And also, if another caregiver calls in and has that information that they're not going to be coming for the next shift, someone needs to know that so that the shift can be covered. And please never, never leave the facility without knowing that there is someone there to take care of the residents.
I know we talked about that and thought, gee, is this something we share in a video? But as unbelievable as it may be to us, people have thought, well, it's nighttime and the people are sleeping, so why? And you know, Mary's coming in at 7 in the morning, certainly they'll be okay, and that they have left the facility uncovered until morning. So this is something, even though it seems common sense for us to make sure there's coverage, we want to emphasize it because we've heard that it's happened in other places.
Yes, and those residents are looking for our care and our concern. They certainly are confident that someone is going to be there to help them in the middle of the night if they get up to the bathroom and fall, or if they stumble in the hallway and are just having a fever or an upset stomach. They need someone there to take care of them.
Right, so it's critical that someone be in the building at all times, so never ever leave the building without having someone relieve you.
Right.
It's that time again, test time, the time we all love so much. It's time to turn off your video and take your post-test. Welcome back. We will now go over the questions and answers. Number 1, the chain of command is the order in which employees are arranged according to the position of authority they have been given.
This is true, Marge. Each person in our chain of command is a valuable link in our care of our residents.
Number 2, as a caregiver in the CBRF, it is not your responsibility to know the chain of command.
This is false. As the caregiver, you do need to know what events you need to report, where you need to report them, and how soon you need to report.
I think it's just good to know that you're not alone in this. So that chain of command is a support rather than a chain. Number 3, often there is only one caregiver on duty in the CBRF.
This is true. In the smaller CBRFs, there will be only one staff on duty. And sometimes in our larger facilities, the night staff is there all by themselves.
Number 4, it is very important for the CBRF caregiver to know what should be reported, when it should be reported, and to whom it should be reported to.
True. Our persons in our facilities need to know that they are a vital link in that chain of command and need to know what information they need to give to others.
Number 5, the chain of command is the same in all CBRFs.
This is false. A chain of command varies according to the size and the structure in that CBRF. Sometimes you are the only caregiver and the only person to make contacts with other persons in that chain.
Number 6, daily sharing and exchanging of important information with other caregivers will promote teamwork among the caregivers.
True. All kinds of information needs to be exchanged to other shifts, to the manager, to the nurse, to the doctor. All these persons need that information that you are the one vitally important to give.
I'm going to take an opportunity to share one more example here, and that was the person that hadn't eaten. And let's say they hadn't eaten all day. To me, that's a perfect example of the reason someone needs to know on the night shift if they're not sleeping. It can be as simple as they've been hungry because they haven't eaten all day. So unless this information is shared, you're not going to get the best care for that person. Number 7, never attempt to perform a task for which you have not been properly trained.
True. If you feel uncomfortable performing any task that you are given, please let someone know, and they can help you get the training that you need to become comfortable and become a better caregiver.
Number 8, it makes no difference when information is reported as long as it's reported.
False. Correct reporting and timely reporting of information is very important, and it needs to be impacted directly on the care that you give residents. So please report things in a timely fashion and in the order that your manager and caregivers want you to do.
That concludes the post-test. Mary, I thank you again for taking the time to share your expertise in this area.
You're very welcome, Marge.
This concludes the unit on chain of command. I hope the information we've shared with you has been valuable. You are special people taking care of special people.